A good Erev Shabbos. There are 74 mitzvahs in this week's parsha, Seitzei, more than any other parsha in the Torah. Let's speak about one of them. The most normal menschlich thing in the world would seem to be returning a lost object. If you find something that belongs to somebody else, wouldn't you try to return it somehow? We were raised well. We feel responsibility, the obligation to do right by helping someone else. The fact of the matter is, it's not so obvious, especially if you don't particularly want it to be. Here's an example. Years ago, we heard a story about a Jewish person who was seeking a path in life, looking for spirituality, a path toward God. She went to a Torah class or two, maybe it was around this time of year, and the topic of a lecture she heard was Hashavas Aveda, returning a lost object, a mitzvah incumbent upon a Jew. She listened, and she thought to herself, boring, how basic, how mundane. Is this supposed to be something that's going to help me in my spiritual quest? Is this a path to God? And with that, she abandoned her at least the Jewish avenue of her search. Sometime later, she found herself maybe in India, maybe in Thailand, who knows how far away, listening to a talk from an enlightened leader, a guru, a spiritual counselor. This person was talking about goodness in the world and how much goodness there is to be found everywhere. As an example, this Maharishi talked about wandering a path once in the forest, just walking along, and suddenly looked down to the side of the path and noticed a wallet along the side of the road. And he picked it up and he thanked the gods or whoever for having put this marvelous gift in his path, and how blessed he felt to come upon this sudden and unexpected but very welcome wealth. At that point, the Jewish girl was struck by the contrast between the story she'd heard in yeshiva about how it's our Torah obligation to return a lost object to its rightful owner, and this so-called teacher who saw everything as coming to him, and something deep inside her clicked, and she returned the Jewish path that deep down she knew to be true. So Parshas Seitzei, in the midst of instructing us about so many dozens of other mitzvahs, makes a point of instructing us about Hashavas Aveda, returning a lost item to its owner. The Torah says simply, in the second aliyah of our Parsha, you should not watch your brother's ox or sheep going astray and turn a blind eye. You should surely return them to your brother. Loisira es shor achicha or es sioi nidachim v'salamta mehem hashev teshivein lachicha. Then the next verse continues, but if your brother's not near you, or if you don't know him, v'im lo yikarev elecha v'lo yadaita, you should bring the item or the animal into your home, and it should stay with you until your brother seeks it out. When the owner appears, you'll give it back. V'asafta el toch beisecha v'haya imach ad drei shachicha isai v'asheva isai lai. As you might expect, there's broad and far-reaching discussion about the implications of this mitzvah of returning lost items, how far a person's responsibility extends, how much effort a person is obligated to invest to try to find the item's rightful owner, who pays the maintenance of the animal or the item from the time the finder's taking care of it until it's finally brought back to its owner. When can an owner be reasonably expected to have abandoned hope of finding it, and when is it indistinguishable from other like items so as to make returning it unlikely or impracticable? Traditionally, when children begin learning the Mishnah, they start with the second chapter of Tractate Bava Metzia, which begins with the words Elu Metzias, these found items. Elu Metzias Shaloi, ve'elu chayav lahachriz, when a person finds a lost object, these are the situations where it becomes his, and these are the situations where he's obligated to announce the finding in hope of returning it to the owner. Apparently, this was the tradition to start the Mishnah study like this for many generations, and when American educators thought it might be a good idea to substitute something else, a different Mishnah, something relevant, the instruction they got from Moshe Feinstein was to leave it as is. Leave it, let this be the first Mishnah that kids learn. He said there's a reason this was the minhag for so long. It started out this point in students' education with the notion that they were part of a community with responsibilities not only to themselves but to others as well, which is a very valuable and central teaching, and it's concretized in this mitzvah to return found items to their rightful owners. I doubt there's one of us who's never lost anything. You know that it's somewhere. You just have to figure out where. I personally am missing 2 sets of keys and my high school diploma I cannot find anywhere, and a souvenir copy of Pravda that I bought when the late great Gorbachev was in charge and I was taking first semester Russian. Our funny story in our family about where on earth could it possibly be is this one. When we lived in Warsaw, we had a friend who flew back and forth pretty frequently between New York and Poland. So whenever he was planning to fly, we would call up a grocery store in New York on the Upper West Side. We would make an order. We used to fax it in, if you remember those days. This was a while ago. And they would deliver it to his doorstep in New York, and he would bring it on the plane to us the next day. Pretty good overnight delivery service. One time a box arrived and showed up at our front door, and when we opened it, there was one of those spiral-bound city maps of New York. Remember Pearlies from the days before GPS? So this was a New York Pearlies. There, and mixed in with our gefilte fish and our pizza cheese and our Reisman's rugelach, was this delivery man's city map. Poor guy probably left it on top of the box for a half a second, and then it got put inside and closed in and taped up. So we imagined this poor driver the next morning somewhere in New York looking for his map. Where did I put my map? He's lifting up the floor mats, he's looking in the trunk, and he said, "Where on earth is my map that I just had yesterday, Chief? It's on somebody's 4th floor apartment kitchen 8,000 miles away." I'm never going to find my diploma. We lose a lot of things. The TTC Lost and Found says they get 70,000 items per year. I'll save you the trouble of doing the math. That's an average of 192 items per day, 365 days a year. How do we get things back? Well, in the times of the temple, the Beis HaMikdash itself was a center of lost and found. It was assumed that most Jews would find their way there sometime or other in the course of the year, and they'd be able to spot their missing keys, phone, whatever it was, headphones. Nowadays, the shul, which is the miniature temple, might be the place where you look for a lost object. I think that over the years, we've obviously had coats and hats and umbrellas and gloves lost and found in shul, but also plenty of sippy cups and keys and yarmulkes, talais and purses, sweaters, among other things. We have a sign in the coat closet about items left after 30 days. You know how that one goes. But really, we do our best to try to go the extra distance to help people who've lost things find them. Nowadays, even in the Costco era, we go to the gym and the store and Costco and the library and the drugstore and so many other places. It's hard to keep track of where we were when we might have forgotten something, left it behind. And yet the shul remains a place where people continue to look for lost objects in the hope that in accordance with the halachas we're discussing, the lost glove or purse or book or key will eventually turn up. So today, even in our times, if you happen into a shul on Bathurst Street, you'll usually see that people post notes on the bulletin boards. I found a set of keys, found a scarf, found one earbud, a bracelet. I always wonder about the one shoe that you see by the side of the street, or 2 shoes tied together over the power lines. How do you lose your shoes or your pants? Always puzzled me. Now, part of the halacha is that something has to have monetary value to be subject to these halachas of Hashavas Aveda. If it's not worth anything, it's not worth the trouble to try to return it. It's an interesting question, what actually has value. One glove or one shoe, is that a value? It's worthless without its mate. So we assume that the owner has the other one, and finding this one would complete a set. Therefore, it's valuable. Now, what about intangibles? What about things that you can't put a price tag on, and you also can't post a note on a bulletin board? How about someone who lost their reputation? How about someone who lost hope? Let me humbly suggest that those also could be found in the synagogue, which is where you're supposed to come and ask about your lost scarf or your gloves or your wallet. Someone could also find some of those intangibles in shul as well. Davening and learning with a minyan, finding hope when it's been lost, learning, studying, even the most valuable thing of all, which we cannot put a price on, our sense of self. Can we find ourselves in shul? Yes, we can. After this very disruptive time over these past few years where we've lost quite a bit, so much time, so much goodwill, good feeling, we can and we are finding ourselves right here in shul. Finding our moorings, finding our anchor, our compass, in friendships, in community, in davening, and in learning. So that's a very valuable finding, not only from the idea of this mitzvah, but from this time of year. Thought of one more story that brings lost items and found reputations together. There's one you might recall from a few years ago. There was a fellow, a Jewish guy, might even have been a rabbi if I recall, who bought himself a desk secondhand on Craigslist. So he's carrying it home, and when he and his friend turned it sideways to get it through the doorway, they noticed an envelope taped to the bottom of one of the drawers. They opened the envelope, and it contained $98,000 in cash. Now ask yourself for a moment what might be some of the thoughts that go through your head when you turned up $98,000 in cash in such a situation. The Jewish fellow in our story called up the non-Jewish guy who sold him the desk and informed him of the find and returned the cash. The newspaper article that recounted this story reported the rabbi's quote that the most important thing in life is to be honest. Now it could be that not every time we come across a mitzvah of hashavas aveda, returning lost objects, not every time is $100,000 at stake. Sometimes much less in cash value, but sometimes even more. The most important thing in life is to be honest with others, of course, honest with God, honest with ourselves too. Rabbi Twersky had a great take on this. He said, you can't fool others. Eventually people will find out what you're up to. You can't fool God, because God is God. The only one you can fool is yourself. And what's the accomplishment in fooling someone who's so easily fooled? So now we're halfway through the month of Elul. Next week after Shabbos we'll already start Slichas, and 2 weeks from tomorrow we'll be welcoming in the new year, please God. It's a time above all for honesty with ourselves, to bring to resolution all the conflicts we know we can resolve in and involving ourselves, and to ask for Hashem's help that resolutions to all the others will come speedily. May we all find the strength and courage to do what needs to be done to bring this year to a successful completion, to begin the new year with good health and happiness and peace. Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom, a happy and healthy and sweet new year.